Hi everyone, I'm Scott Schneider. This is Stereo Niche. Hey, this week it's another look at audio ads, this time from 1984. All right, so let's start it off. I've put this in manufacturer order, in alphabetical order, as best I can. It may be a little bit out of alignment there, but for the most part, that'll be the way I sort of organized the list here. So kicking us off is ADS, not a speaker ad. You would expect ADS to have some speaker ads. I'm sure they did, I just didn't see them here, but ADS Atelier. I've not seen this before. This was something I didn't know that they made. So this is kind of an interesting advertisement here. Looks like, you know, they may have had some help getting this together, but does everything. It's a tuner, an amplifier, cassette deck, turntable, everything in one system. So something that I was not aware that they made. So this is kind of cool. It shows that companies are already diversifying, getting out of, you know, if they were into a specific niche, they're already branching out, trying to get into other categories. Here's Advent, only ad I found of Advent. Quite a departure. This was, the big change. They went away from their original Advent format and speakers. They had other things, but the line significantly changed. And I don't know that Advent they never came back from this period of time. Some good products I've seen and heard these speakers. They sound great. They just didn't get mind share like they had before. Now, Iowa, or Iowa, I don't know how most want to pronounce it, but I recall them at this time. They were quite dynamic. They were out there. They were advertising. They had all these cool, flashy products. I remember them really going after the market. Haven't seen a lot of them survive over the years, but during this time frame in 1984 anyway, they seem to be, I'll say 80s centric. You know, they seem to have fit the time frame very well. So they had a lot of cool advertising. They seem to have more so these, I guess, I wouldn't call them quite micro, but these sort of smaller systems. All-in-one type units, or system in a box, if you will. Another advertisement here, cool cassette deck, lots of flashy lights. I mean, they just look cool. I think at the time frame, they would have probably been quite dominant in the sales numbers, because I think it just sort of hit the 80s very well. Here's AR. AR has branched out beyond their speakers. They're still pushing, you know, like on the far right here, AR9, now it's the 9LS, but it's Teledyne acoustic. You know, things have not the early 50s, 60 version of, or company of acoustic research. Different company now, but still doing well, still cranking out some great product and expanding it into other areas. Alpine. Every time I think of Alpine, you know, I just think of Lamborghini. Those two things just go together. The Alpine car stereos were very dominant during this time frame. They were always, in my head, considered, you know, high-end audiophile, if you will, for cars. They bought Luxman in 1984. So they started combining their efforts and marketing initiatives here, as we see on the right, and marketing them, you know, together, but put an Alpine in your car and have a Luxman, you know, in the house. So a lot was going on during this time frame between those two. Now, Audia. Don't recall this brand. Looks good, looks pretty interesting, but it's just not a brand that I recognized. I wanted to put it in here because there was so much in the way of car advertising going on. It was almost 50% car audio and 50% home audio, so I wanted to make sure I captured that. Audio Technica is still advertising. Same sort of ads. I don't think that they changed much over, you know, decade to decade for the most part. the 70s, I think this was pretty much the same ad, but they're still advertising. The turntable is still quite relevant. It hasn't, really declined too much, but they're still advertising the same way they had been. B&W. B&W, they didn't. I don't know that they had much in the way of market share in the 70s, but they're picking it up in the 80s. I think they're starting to become more of a U.S. brand, getting more market share, brand awareness, I'll say. So they're the first time I've really noticed that they started taking a more aggressive approach to putting their brand out there. BES. The only advertisement I saw for them, I've seen these speakers, I've run across them before, but I've never owned any. Not quite sure of how well they sound. I don't think I've had any time with them, but they're a brand I'm aware of at least, but not sure how long they actually were around. Now Bose. I think this is about when Bose, just before I think they really took off and dominated the home audio scene. When they came out with their smaller ones a little bit later, in their waveform smaller stereos, I think that's when they really took over a lot of market share. But this is about the beginning of it. I think this is when Bose started to get a lot more recognition. They were doing a lot more advertising, at least, from what I could tell. And so this is when we start to see Bose, evolve into the company I think we mostly recognize today. Boston Acoustics. Now, while Boston Acoustics, I think, had some good traction in the 70s, I think they started getting a lot better market share and recognition in the 80s. I couldn't recall, and I kind of vaguely remember these C700s on the left here, these thin sort of for the home and home theater type of, I think they're a little bit ahead of the curve here and getting into that scene. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Then they have their standard full spectrum home speakers on the right. Carver, so many fans for Carver. And this is, I think, when Carver's getting aggressive, they're out there. That's a heck of an impressive receiver. To me, it looks more 70s, even though it's 1984. But they're, taking that position that the receiver is still the thing. You need this receiver, and they're still obviously, highlighting the fact that it's 130 watts, different from most of the other manufacturers that you'll see. So a bit more traditional, I think I'll say, for the Carver advertising initiative, at this time frame. Casio. Boy, that's a brand I recall so much in the early 80s. They were everywhere with their watches and their calculators, and then they had these little mini computers, and then they had this little 16-pound recording studio. I actually remember this thing. They had a lot of brand recognition. Now, I put it in here mainly to show all the different things that were vying for consumer dollars at the time. 1978, quite different. The stereo and the music scene is it. There's not much else to take over your dollars. But 1984, you've got things like this going on. Computers are coming in. So just other things are, taking the spendable income from consumers, and those manufacturers, are all vying for those, and they're getting into different segments. So de-emphasizing, that's kind of why it explains the de-emphasizing of certain things like receivers and amps, because consumers had to spread it across a broader area. Canton's into the car audio scene as well. Very good brand for home audio, and they've branched out into the car audio side of things. Celestion were very, fairly prominent in the 70s. They're still marketing standard, type of speakers. They're still here. Obviously, they're emphasizing the digital ready. My gosh, that was probably the most overemphasized marketing terminology, I guess, of the 80s. Concord. Concord, similar to Alpine, Concord was what, at that time anyway, considered a bit of a, I'll say, audiophile car audio brand. I actually had a Concord receiver, and I can tell you, of course, it was, I was a young man, I didn't have my own home, of course, and so I didn't really have anything to speak of as far as home audio as high end. But man, when I got my Concord, I felt like I had stepped it up a notch. Denon, we all know Denon mostly as a turntable company, which is how they got started. They made and make some of the best turntables ever. This is what I tend to think of when I think of Denon. However, they have moved into all other categories as well. So on the left, they've got full spectrum of home audio components. They've even got pro gear here in the middle, cassettes, as well as reel-to-reel. And on the right, car audio. They've moved into that as well. I didn't recall that until I saw the ad, but they had moved into car audio just like everyone else. Dahlquist, still pushing, they've stayed in their segment. They stayed true to their form here. They're sort of, I say, monkey coffin. I hate to use that term, but sort of the boxy, standard boxed speakers. On the left here, they had sort of showcased the DQ10 a bit, which is what got them on the map, if you will. But they're still out there, still advertising. Design Acoustics. Now, Design Acoustics had advertising in the 70s. In 78, I had an ad for them. However, what really put them on the map was the PS8 and PS10. These are some very cool speakers. They had a very interesting form factor, little square, cube, if you will, but they sound so good. You could put these, up high, and they had great little bass to them. A very dynamic speaker. So this is the speaker line that sort of got them that recognition. Still, just they sort of stayed true to their form and stayed in that segment. But if you've ever run across some some PS10s or PS8s, take a hard look at them because they're just a fun speaker. Now Harman Kardon has taken a kind of a cool 80s, their perspective of the 80s style. This line I think was around for a few years. Wasn't too much of a fan of these tiny little buttons, but that was what they had at the time. It's very Harman Kardonish. On the right is that I almost had one of these turntables. It was with the box and everything, and unfortunately, by the time I could get there, it was the owner had sold it, but it was a pretty unique style. Now here, just like most manufacturers of the day, they wanted to continue building their revenue. They had to get into car audio. So they were putting out some interesting car audio at the time. And on the right, when I first saw that, I thought it was a home amp, but that's a car amplifier. Hitachi, not a huge brand name, in home audio, but I think just about every manufacturer was getting into CDs at the time. Huge wave. Everyone was adding a CD player and starting to buy CDs. Jensen. Well, I always think of Jensen as as a speaker company, and man, that the car speakers were they were the thing. They also put out car stereos as well. As far as I recall, they were pretty well regarded. Pretty cool features. They had their own design aesthetic as well. JVC had some cool home stereo stuff, but I remember them during this time. A lot of their car audio stuff was coming out too, but they've got that distinctive. They were into the EQs, meters and flashy screens and all of this. I was thinking about it the other day. And maybe because I've just passed up, I don't know, but it didn't seem like this era of gear with this sort of the little digital interfaces here that lasted. I'm imagining that the screens blew out and they just didn't last, and so people tossed them. Whereas the older 70s analog gear just it just was unbreakable almost. On the right side, tape, VHS, VCRs are in, and you got to buy tape media for it. So just another area, again, it's where the consumer is thinking about. They're starting to make home videos, so that's a whole other segment that's come into play since the 70s. Kenwood. Kenwood's still marketing their home audio, but Kenwood in a huge way moved into car audio, and I think dominated that sector for a good while. I've seen so many cars with Kenwood stereos in them. Now we have Klipsch. Someone was just asking, when I did the 78 review, where was Klipsch? Well, they weren't really advertising much, or at least not where I was looking, but by 84, they're very much advertising. They're still making their Klipsch horns on the right, which is their top of the line product, but putting out some other cool stuff. I remember when the KG4 came out. It was about the time I started considering, buying my first home stereo, and I remember looking at the KG4s at that time. But Klipsch is out there, putting out advertising, getting that brand awareness. Koss still around, still promoting their gear. They've gone now a little bit downsized. They've got some full-size products, but I remember these pretty well, these small speakers at the Dynamite pair being advertised quite significantly. Kyocera. Now, Kyocera, this is about the time they came out. They had moved into the high-end audio market in the early 80s. They may have come out initially in 83, but just about the time they started coming out. Everything that Kyocera made, pretty much, I don't think they made anything that was be considered low-end. Everything they made was expensive and kind of high-end. So they had everything from amps to receivers to cassette decks and CD players. They made everything. But they lasted for about 10 years, and it was too costly. They never could gain enough market share. But boy, anything that they made, if you find it, it's a stellar product. This line I didn't remember from them. I had seen all the other items, but I didn't know this one. This is the first time I've seen it. I'd thought all of their other products always had the wood end caps to them, but this was quite interesting. I was not familiar of this particular line. Now here's Luxman. Luxman only, not with the Alpine, but Luxman is, of course, Alpine's luxury home audio brand. And, they're trying to showcase that. Interesting ads here, but I think that's the intent here, is to show that they're a up-level brand. Now here's Magnepan. Magnepan, not a big advertiser. This was a very small ad. I had to blow it up significantly, but they're still out there. An esoteric speaker for $500. So they're, still relevant, but not, sort of dominating, at least in the advertising space. Magnavox. It's made by who? It's exactly my sentiment. I put in this ad in here because this was, I think, for many home buyers, these what we call match sets, and this exemplifies it, where you buy everything all in one kit. They may or may not be actual separate pieces, but they give you the cabinet, some speakers to go around it, and it was a pretty good price point. So they looked the part of an audiophile system, but they weren't really. Now here's Marantz' offering of the day. They got into this interesting gold aesthetic for a while, and don't think it aged well, but this is what they were offering in 1984. Again, this is also a rack system in a way. Marantz's were going to be a little bit better than the Magnavox, but they still had separates. I just didn't see any specific ads for them. Macintosh, that ad could be in the 70s. It could also be in the 60s. Macintosh just was not a prolific advertiser during this time frame, and each time I released the last two videos of ads, I would get a question of, where's Macintosh? Well, that's them. That was a very small ad. I blew it up, but they just didn't advertise in a big way at all. I don't know when they actually started taking off and advertising significantly, but it certainly wasn't in 1984 or 78 or even 1960. But anyway, this is what their advertisement looked like in 1984. Maxell. Again, the cassette is the thing for, in the car, and CDs in the car hadn't quite started yet. Yeah, they were strictly in the home. So if you wanted to take tunes with you, you had to get it on some tape. The ad on the right, of course, is probably one of the most well-known ads ever from Maxell, and it's pretty timeless. Mission. Mission has moved into other categories besides just speakers, or at least that's the only one. I don't know that they always made anything outside of speakers. That's what I know them as, but they're making turntables now, and looks like is that a VCR on the right or a CD player? But so they moved into other categories. I had to blow this up pretty significantly. It was a very small ad. Mitsubishi, they had, if you recall from the 78, they had some very significant home audio gear, some nice separates, and now they're moving in and highlighting their CD player of the day. Morel. Morel is a company that makes fantastic speaker drivers, and I had never seen an advertisement from them. So this was in the back of the magazines, and so I just thought I'd put it in here just to show that while they only made drivers, mostly for other manufacturers, they had their own advertising, which I thought was kind of interesting. Now, NAD, I think some people call them NAD. I don't call them NAD. That's not a way I would like to reference them. So NAD was very, prolific company. They made some outstanding products. What I didn't know, or didn't recall anyway, was that they ever made any speakers. I didn't recall that until I saw the ad. But the Model 20 was out in 1984. So if anyone's ever had a set, let me know. I'd like to know your impression of what they were like. Nakamichi, probably near the peak of Nakamichi. I'm sure they were probably advertising the Dragon around this time, but I didn't see it in the advertisement here. But the 505, which I have one of these as well, is a very cool cassette deck. If you're not familiar with this, the cassette actually, when you change direction, the cassette door opens up, the cassette spins around, flips around, and then goes back in within a second. It's the coolest thing ever. And just very, very cool gear coming out of Nakamichi at this time frame. But the RX 505, it looks Dragonish with those buttons. That's what made Nakamichi stand out from the crowd. NEC, the Beta Hi-Fi. So, the old Beta versus VHS wars. They're out there marketing their product. Obviously, we know Beta didn't win. Here's Ohm. Ohm, again, not prolific. I think I had them in the 78 video as well. Looks like it's probably still from that time frame. Ohm just always sort of, out there and did their thing. A lot of fans for it, and a lot of very cool products. This is, the Ohm Walsh here is the one that I think most of us are familiar with. They had regular box speakers, but the Ohm Walsh is the one that set them apart. Onkyo. Onkyo had, I think that's just typical 80s product there on the left. All those colors and graphics and all of that just screams 80s. And on the right, I couldn't recall this Onkyo Integra line at this time, but that would have, I assume, would have been their higher level offering of the day. Now here's Pioneer. Quite a different view than the 1978 ads, right? Pioneer's got 2-page ads, and they're very dominant in the sector. This one on the left, kind of cool, very space-oriented here with lasers for the CD. So kind of cool. It's a nice looking design. I just can't recall having run across these, but on the right, emphasizing what all can you connect to your receiver. So many sources, and they're putting out a product where you can connect them all. You get this Pioneer, man, and there's nothing you can't connect to it. So that's where the Pioneer is at this point in time. Now the other thing they have is something that was short-lived, the laser vision, laser disc. So laser disc, if you've not seen these before, they're the size of an LP, but it looks like a big, huge CD. And so these were, I don't know exactly when they came in and sort of left the market, but I think they had about a 10-year run. And I have one of these. I don't have this model, but I do have one of these. And it was, for some period of time, it was thought to be the next big thing, and it just didn't gain market share over time. The VHS tape eclipsed it and was the preferred format for folks watching movies. Now Polk is everywhere. Polk is hitting on all cylinders. They are probably the dominant manufacturer for speakers in this time frame. They sort of just took off, and they had a spectrum of products, in every category. The SDA line is, I would say, fairly dominant. I've run across them numerous times, so they must have been fairly prolific. So here's some of the ads here. More ads, continued. They just kept putting it out. Probably if you asked anyone during that time frame to name the top 3 speaker manufacturers, I'm sure Polk was probably right there. Radio Shack's still doing well. They're still, a force in the electronics arena. And they've got their new 3-way system here on the left with an advanced Leaf Super Tweeter. Goes all the way to 40,000 hertz. I don't know, I guess that's for dogs because nobody else can hear that. And on the right, disc players, so they're not missing out on the trends. They're staying in there with what's cool. Now this one is interesting. From RCA, probably one of the worst. Now it reminds me of the speaker brand we saw in '78. That company called Sinus. Just horrible naming. Who thought that naming your stereo system Dementia was something anyone wanted? Who wants dementia? No one wants dementia. And I think that just was horrible naming by them. Looks cool. Look at that remote. That thing looks like it's, came out of Star Trek maybe. But anyway, horrible name. Nobody wanted to say I got dementia, Now here's Reeboks. Reeboks reminds me of the European Macintosh because they look just like that in '78. Their products were the same. They didn't really change much. Just very solid, very well built, and probably excellent specs coming from Switzerland here. I actually had that B225 here. Very nice CD player, and about the only thing that goes wrong with them pretty much is you just need to replace the laser on those things, but which I think are still available. But a very, very good CD player. If you want a vintage CD player, someone asked me this not long ago, that is one I would recommend if you can get a laser for it. But anyway, that's Reeboks. Rotel, I think I like this ad so much I just wanted to put it in here twice. But just not a lot of advertising from Rotel at the time. They're still here, but Rotel's a great brand. I'm not sure where they were with their other products, but it's always been a brand, but they just weren't great at advertising. All right, Sansui. My impression being I have a lot of Sansui. I don't have much Sansui from the 80s though. And, because of that, in my head, the G series and the AU, TU line, the separates, and all of that from the 70s, that just has my mind about when Sansui was at its peak. But when you look at the advertising, it tells a different story. Sansui is, at least from what ads I've taken, about the most prolific advertiser in the whole segment here in electronics. Now, significant change, look how cool. I think that receiver is cool in here on the left. It's got a lot of colors. It's got a lot of buttons, a lot going on there. On the right, the speakers. So as far as Sansui speakers, I'm not a big fan of Sansui speakers because Sansui was, I think, the best at their electronics. except for this model. I've only read great things about the XL900, or the XL series, I'll say. And they put a lot of effort into them. They're not very common though. It's hard to find them. I've not owned a set. I really would like to find a set, at least someone, a set of this model line. They look very, Yamaha NS series. They look like that. But I think they were a much improvement over their prior offerings of the 70s. So moving on, they're in every category. They're in car audio now. They have high octane performance at a regular price. That's kind of catchy. And they're putting out lots of different stuff. They're also doing these rack systems. So they're advertising a lot, and I'm kind of surprised that they didn't get more market share. At least I don't run across more. Here's another car audio ad in a Ferrari. So a bit of a surprise for me. I honestly, had I not gone through this and taken a look at what they were trying to do, I would have thought they had dissipated quite a bit by 1984, but doesn't seem to be true at all. Now Sanyo. Sanyo, I knew Sanyo. I had some Sanyo products in the 80s. I never thought that they were high-end though. I thought they were mid-fi. But what I didn't recall was their high-end brand, this Ultrex. Ultrex is the high-end brand for Sanyo. In the way that Optonica is the high-end brand of Sharp, that's what Sanyo was trying to do. However, I knew Optonica, but I didn't know, or I didn't recall this Ultrex brand. So this one I didn't know existed until I saw it in the advertisement. I've never run across it. Glad I saw it now, because if I were to have run across it, I probably would have said, no, that's, I probably would have thought it was a house brand, to be honest. But no, it actually was a upgraded brand of Sanyo. Now here it is again. While they did the same thing in home audio, they had the same direction for car audio, where they had the Sanyo brand for car audio and then Ultrex for cars as well. So they were trying to cover both sides of that. Sherwood, only time I could find a Sherwood ad, and it's for car audio, but they're still around. They're still producing product. And I can tell you, I didn't really know the Sherwood brand until I became a collector. Sherwood, I think, had their peak during the tube era, but they're still around. They're still a brand. And at this point in time, the only thing I could find was this car ad here. But anyway, that's Sherwood. Now Sony. It's kind of an interesting ad. A few words for those who haven't experienced Sony's new compact disc player. Well, if you haven't experienced it, they can't tell you much, but if you have experienced it, they have a lot to say here on the right side. So they spent quite a bit of money putting these two ads out there, full page ads. So they're after the CD market. Now they've moved on into, lots of categories here. Home audio, this is those little flat woofer speakers that they had for a while. And they're into car audio, obviously. And they're showing on the right, hey, take your CD from the home and take it to your car. We got you covered. And on the road. That's, the Walkman and all that is also hitting its stride and starting to take consumer dollars. Tape. There were a lot more tape ads out there. I remember TDK. I think it's kind of the brand I mostly used when I was buying tape. For some reason, it resonated with me. And the vast majority of my cassettes were from TDK. Technics. That receiver looks just like it's from the 80s. That's about as 80-ish, I think, as you can get. So look at all those colors and sliders and buttons and all that. On the right side, the CD player. Everyone has a CD player. If you're in the audio arena, you've got a CD player out there. A lot more Technics. Technics, fairly prolific. I wouldn't say quite as prolific as Sansui at this time frame, but they're hitting their stride. Cassette decks and still in turntables. This is their P mount, which doesn't get a whole lot of attention. And then on the right side, a linear tracker. 10. I remember this brand. I'm not sure if it's still around, but Fujitsu 10 car audio. Guess if you get their car audio, you can get a pretty young lady get in your car. Triad. the Triad 70. So Triad was a very cool company. They made some really cool speakers. And I don't have any in my collection, but I've seen them. I would love to find this little Triad 70 here. This little separates or sat sub, just extremely cool. I've seen them, but I have never owned any. But I thought this was probably one of the, kind of like RTR, had some really interesting speaker designs. Triad was right in there. Now Yamaha is sort of hitting on all cylinders. They've got their NS line that they're still promoting here. They're a very dominant speaker model line of the era. On the right, looks just like a lot of the other designs, colors, buttons. This is for cassette, but their line is very, I guess, design-wise similar to the other manufacturers, trying to be the 80s style. And then they've got their separates. Now you don't have to pay an arm and a leg for your ears, okay? And they're disc players, so they're right there, very relevant, right in the heat of things as well. All right, well, there you have it. Quite a big change from just 78. 78, it was all about the receiver and the Watts wars and speakers, tons of speaker manufacturers. 1984, complete change, tectonic shift, I'll say. Hardly any manufacturers for speakers, or comparatively speaking, quite a number less. Bose is coming into play. Polk is dominating with the advertising. Boston Acoustics coming into play. So, pretty big shift. The receiver, it's de-emphasized. There's so much going on the sources side of things that the receiver just, isn't the big emphasis as far as big and powerful. It's about what you connect to it. So things have changed. You can hook up now something, your VCR, your CD player, digital ready. All of that is in play now, and the manufacturers have shifted away from the receiver being the center of the universe in a way to what can you bring into it? What are the sources? So the VCR has come in, the CD player has come in a huge way, and cassettes, huge media there. Less emphasis on the turntable. We saw the advertising in the marketplace for Denon. Denon went from really being just strictly a turntable company to having everything. So interesting change in just a 6-year time frame. As we know, it kept moving on from there, and how big the home theater market would become, but this was just the genesis of that, and we were still in a bit of transition from being music-centric to moving into home theater. But interesting time frame. I hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was quite interesting to see the changes in those few years. That'll be the last ad overview I do for a little bit. I have other ones I want to do, but I've got some exciting stuff coming up, some new gear I'm acquiring, and some other stuff I want to cover. So I'll do those in the next videos. So if you don't want to miss those, be sure to hit subscribe, give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time.